MegaPodTastic.
What's the word on the street?
Allow myself to introduce myself.
Isn't that right, Mr. Poopy Pants?
We have so many questions that we want to ask you about the universe.
What the hell is wrong with me?
You guys ever been to Uranus?
Hey, this is Krazy Joe. I'm 40 years old, and I grew up in the 80s, and if you, like me, grew up in the 80s and watched Nickelodeon in the early days of Nickelodeon, there was a show that I think was really something special. It's something that I have fond memories of, and it was called Out of Control. And in the days before Dave Coulier was known for Full House, this was his big thing. He hosted a show called Out of Control. It was sort of a parody talk variety show with a lot of comedy skits. If you've never seen it, go to YouTube, find some. There's some full episodes up there. There's about 6 full episodes, but I'm happy to say that I have one of the cast members with us today. He played the role of Hern Burford, one of the best characters on the show. Marty Schiff is with us. Marty, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here.
Wow, I love Out of Control. Here's... I got in touch with you a couple weeks ago on Facebook to clear up a couple questions. Number one, and you already told me the answer, but there's misinformation on the internet. If you look on the internet, anywhere you look, like IMDb or Wikipedia, they all claim there were only 8 episodes of Out of Control, and I knew that could not possibly be true.
Right. There was actually a pilot and then 25 episodes after that. So there's actually 26 episodes of Out of Control. And even if you look at my IMDb page, it only lists a few of the episodes, which is a shame because there was so much good material there.
Yeah, it was driving me crazy because there was one particular bit that I was trying very hard to find on YouTube. And I found like about 8 episodes on YouTube, 6 or 8, and this wasn't in there. And I'm thinking, if there were only 8 episodes, I should have come across this. And it was the Really Big World song. And
one of the greatest moments, I think, in Out of Control history with it was Jim Turner who sang that song, and he was one of the Ducks. And Duck's Breath Mystery Theater was the writers of the show, and they were an improv troupe out of San Francisco. And that song is actually one of my favorite pieces that we did in the entire series. So it's great song. And I think I know that I have it somewhere because when my son was very young, we used to listen to it all the time, and he can practically sing all the lyrics. Now he's 20 years old; he can practically sing all the lyrics still today. But I'll see if I can find it and send it over to you, Joe.
I'd appreciate it. I could probably sing a lot of it. And I haven't seen it in over 20 years. But it's one of those little songs you never forget once you've heard it. It's in your head.
Right.
So and you've done, I should point out, you've got a very good resume. You've done a lot more than Out of Control. Out of Control was where I first discovered you. And I'm also a big horror movie fan, so I, of course, have seen Dawn of the Dead and Creepshow and all the Romero films you've done. So I wanted to talk mainly about Out of Control because that's where I was first introduced to you, and I just think that character of Hern Burford was so memorable. Just the name. That's a great name right there.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, it's interesting you bring up my horror career because in film, most of my career in film was horror. On television, it was sitcom, and Out of Control was children's programming. But if it hadn't been for Dawn of the Dead, which I did with George Romero when I was still in college, that really started it all for me. That led to me meeting a casting director who would cast me in my first piece, that would get me into Screen Actors Guild, my first union piece, I should say. That would get me into the Screen Actors Guild, and actually gave me the ability to go to Hollywood and get an agent and do all those things. So, Out of Control is a direct result of working with George in Dawn of the Dead and Creepshow. So, that all of that is sort of the genesis of my professional career started with Dawn of the Dead.
It's funny because the Romero movies have a bit of a connection with children's television, because not only did you go on to star on some children's shows, but so many of the Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood cast members were in those movies. Like Chef Brockett from Mr. Rogers was a zombie, and
right.
Yeah.
Well, and Nicky Tallow, who was actually one of the Grips, ended up being one of the bikers in the movie. He worked for Mr. Rogers for years and years and years, as did Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton was Mr. Rogers' floor manager before he went out to Hollywood. Actually, I think he went to New York first to do stand-up, and he ended up in Hollywood. So Michael Keaton got his start with Mr. Rogers. You had sort of two routes when you were growing up in Pittsburgh in the business. It was either George or Fred. You had Fred Rogers was sort of training a lot of people, and because most of the Grips from Dawn of the Dead had worked with Mr. Rogers, so they're very, very connected. And I'm sure Mr. Rogers was proud of that. I'm sure he was. I worked with him briefly and got to meet him, but he was very proud of all the people that came up through the ranks of his show and went on to do other things. So a lot of people listening may not know that Mr. Rogers was also done in Pittsburgh, as was George's early films were all done here in Pittsburgh. And so there's a very strong connection there.
So how did you get involved with Out of Control?
Well, it's interesting. When I moved to Hollywood in 1979 full-time, after I graduated from Point Park College, and I went up there and actually came back my first year to do Night Riders with George, and then went back to Hollywood, and then came back and did Creepshow, went back to Hollywood, and started my television career shortly after that with a show called The Book of Lists. So I started working in television more than film. And one day my agent called, and he said, Marty, I have to apologize to you up front. And I said, what's up? He said, well, I've got an audition for you. He said, sounds like an interesting show, but I'm going to apologize because it's cable. And there was silence on the phone because in those days, cable wasn't really much of anything, And I went, cable? And he went, yeah, it's a cable show, but it looks like it's going to be kind of fun. So he sent me over to meet Bob Hughes and Larry Sulkus, who were the producers, and Bob was the director of the show, and the creators of the show. And they were from Kansas. Like the core crew of Out of Control was from Kansas City. And Kansas was in the World Series. And I walk in to audition, and these guys are sitting around a television set watching baseball. So I actually sit down and watch baseball with them for, maybe 15, 20 minutes before they say, okay, let's go do the audition. And I created Hern in the audition. They weren't really sure about what they wanted. They said, we want this guy to be a lazy slob. We want him to be, all about him. We want him to be, and they gave me sort of the parameters of Hern. And pretty much nailed who Hern was going to be in the audition. And we found out, the next day that I got the show, and that was how it went down. We shot the pilot right after Thanksgiving. I think it was, I want to say 1984, right after Thanksgiving. And it was a completely different cast then. The only originals that went on to the series were Dave, myself, and Diz. There was a character named Stick, and he would become Waldo. His character would become Waldo. And so if you see an episode where Flimbach, the game Flimbach, I don't know if you remember that, Joe.
I definitely remember the stupid game with the stupid name.
The stupid game with the stupid name. That's right. Flimbach. Well, Flimbach, that episode is the pilot episode. That was the very first episode of Out of Control. And if you look at it, the characters aren't really quite developed yet. I hadn't gotten Hern's laugh down, for example. I hadn't really gotten a lot of it down. I don't know if Dave did I don't even think he did one cut it out. He might have done one cut it out. I'm not sure. But, you know, the Diz was Diz. That is Diz in real life. When you watch Diz on the show, that's who she is in real life. But our characters, Dave and myself, and, you know, it became much more developed as we got into the series. But that was the very first episode. Was the one that had Slim Buck in it, and How to Build a Treehouse. I think that was in that episode too. And if you look at How to Build a Treehouse, Dave Stenstrom, who would go on to play Waldo, is the one who's building the treehouse. So that's an interesting episode to see if you're a fan of the show.
Huh, I want to rewatch that one now. I don't remember the character of Stick.
Right. And unfortunately, and Stick was he was also in a horror film, but it was a parody horror film that was called Student Bodies.
Oh,
and it was hilarious. He's in that.
I've never seen that movie, but I know of that movie because I had a customer in a video store I worked in who came in and asked for it every week.
It's funny. It's so funny. And he's in that. And unfortunately, you know, he had a genetic disorder, and he died very young. He passed away. But that is the only episode that Stick was in of Out of Control, was the pilot episode.
So you only did one season.
Two seasons, actually. But
two seasons?
Well, they broke it down. In those days, Nickelodeon was doing 13 shows basically in a season. But, yeah, I mean, it was 26, so essentially, yes, one season. Okay.
Well, they ran those episodes they ran them constantly for years. So even though there weren't many episodes, they just ran into the 90s, I think. Do you get recognized as Hern today? Like walking down the street, do people just say, "Hey, that's Hern Burford"?
Well, not so much now, but back in the day I did, and there's a funny story. When we came back from California, we lost our home in the Northridge Earthquake in 1994, and Out of Control, it actually ran, I think, until 91 or 92. I know my daughter was able to watch it when she was very young, and she was born in 90. And so we came back. We were living in a small community in southwestern Pennsylvania called Farmington, PA, which was up in the mountains. The only place to eat at that time in Farmington was a place called Pizza Hut. There was that, and then there was a resort, you know. So we had a Pizza Hut in Farmington, and that was it. So my wife, my daughter, and I went up to eat lunch one day at the Pizza Hut, and Macy was in a high chair, you know, and we were sitting there, and all of a sudden these two bikers, you know, a Harley pulls up, and a guy and his girlfriend get off the bike, and they're big. I mean, he's like 6'4", she's like 6'2", and they're, you know, wearing blue jeans, and they got tattoos, and they got chains and spikes, and they look pretty scary. You know? So they come walking into the Pizza Hut, and the guy is staring at me. And I said to my wife, I said, you know, I don't know what this guy's problem is, but I'm really pretty uncomfortable here. So I don't want to have to defend you against him with a spork. I said, that's all we got. So I'm going to get a box. Let's go home. We'll eat at home. She went, okay. So I stood up, and this guy stood up, and he was towering over me. And I'm thinking, I lived in L.A. all those years, and I survived it. I'm going to get killed in a Pizza Hut in Farmington, Pennsylvania. Guy looks down at me and he goes, are you Hern? And I said, what? He said, are you Hern Burford? And I went, well, I was Hern Burford. And he was like, I love you. He said, honey, this is Hern from Out of Control, my favorite show. I told you about what are you doing here? So I had to go through the whole story. He and his girlfriend came over and sat down with us. He told me every episode of Out of Control. I was his favorite character. And he told me all the bits, I mean, word for word. I mean, this guy was a hardcore fan. So at the end of lunch, I signed his autograph. I autographed his pizza box. And he and his wife, his girlfriend, rode off into the sunset. And I looked at my wife and said, who'd have thought? You know, who'd have thought that? So back in the day, I used to get recognized often. We had a lot of watchers. We had a lot of viewers, and I used to get fan mail from fraternities because we were on at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and these frats would stay up and party all night long, and then they made a drinking game out of every time I laughed, out of every time Hern laughed, they'd do a shot, or every time Dave said, "Cut it out," they'd do a shot. So here was this children's show that actually became a drinking game for a bunch of colleges around the country. It was really kind of fun. I'm proud of that.
Why did first of all, you were the first original show Nickelodeon created.
Yes.
Up till then, like, You Can't Do That on Television was imported from Canada, and I think Pinwheel might have been a Canadian show too. Why did they pull the plug?
Well, what had happened was there was a changing of the guard. And when Nickelodeon first got started, it was actually Pinwheel was a 3-hour children's show. I think it was either out of Cleveland or Columbus. It had its roots in Ohio. And the people that had created Pinwheel called Bob Klein, who, if you look at the credits, you'll see Klein and is the producers, the executive producers of the show. They called Bob Klein, they knew Bob, and said, we want to, ramp it up a little bit. What can we do? And we want it to be irreverent. We don't want to be just another Disney Channel. We want to be a little bit on the edge. And that's how Out of Control sort of got started. We were part of like the Bad Kids Network. And if you look at, the characters, like Hern had 5 ex-wives. You'd never find that on Disney. You would just never find that. So, we had created this sort of edgy show that parents could enjoy watching with their children. And so about, I want to say about halfway through production, they had ordered 26 total. And about, 14th, 15th show, Nickelodeon changed guard. So the guys that originally had come up with Out of Control, Jerry Laybourne took over the network. And Jerry, she was more focused on education. And, to quote Dave, we may be scientific, but we may be stupid, but we're scientifically stupid. I mean, that was the show. We had a certain, Angela was kind of Angela Scoop Quickly, Jill Lakewood was sort of the good reporter, and I was the bad reporter. And if you watch Jill, she actually gave you some interesting information. My stuff was always bogus. It was always fake, but hers was kind of real. But it wasn't educational enough, So that's why they pulled the plug on Out of Control, was because we were, I guess, too silly and too irreverent, and they already had You Can't Do That on Television out of Canada was much cheaper for them to put on the air than Out of Control. And we were very similar shows. And most people today, when they say, "Oh yeah, you were the show with Slime and Alanis Morissette," and we're going, "No, that was You Can't Do That on Television. We were Out of Control." But that was the real reason they pulled the plug. We weren't, I guess, educational enough, and they had enough sort of edgy, silly stuff with You Can't Do That in Television, and there wasn't room for both of us. You Can't Do That in Television was more affordable for them to put on the air. So that was why we got pulled.
Now, you mention similarities between You Can't Do That on Television and Out of Control. I'm going with a memory that I haven't seen more than 6 episodes of the show in 20 years.
Right.
Was there a running gag, or is this my imagination? Was there a running gag with people getting mustard dumped on them? I know it happened at least once or twice, but it seems like there was a running mustard.
We were dropping stuff on people, I think a while before they were doing that on You Can't Do That on Television. But, they sort of had, they had slime. We had mustard. I think we did mustard once. We had mustard. We had a lot of pies. I think I hold the record for throwing pies and getting hit with pies on Nickelodeon. But we did a lot of pie things, a lot of pie jokes.
And it was always preceded with a "let me have it," right?
Yeah, let me have it. Right. Let me have it, Dave. Right, exactly. So, but we did drop other things. We dropped the mail. There was an episode where Waldo, I think the name of the episode was Fan Mail, actually. And Waldo gets a ton of mail dropped on his head. So we were always dropping things on people. There was an episode, the one you're thinking about, was Jill was making a giant hot dog. Angela was making a giant hot dog. And that's where the mustard came in. There was mustard and relish, and it was pretty funny.
I also remember, I think it was the mail episode, the mail woman was saying, no, nor rain, nor snow, nor hail, nor mustard. As she said it, it was all hitting Dave on the head.
You know what? Maybe you may be right. And the mail woman, by the way, was the wife of Oak O'Connor, who did all the great prop work for Out of Control. She was Oak's wife and just did a great job. We had a lot of fun guest stars on the show too. Dennis Miller was a guest star. If you know the comedian Dennis Miller,
oh yeah,
who is also from Pittsburgh and who also went to Point Park. So Dennis was a guest on the show. And then if you watch the guest stars on the show, there's a lot of people that went on to do a lot of things. I can't remember his name right now, but he did Mystery Science Theater 2000.
Joel Hodgson.
Joel was a guest star on Out of Control, and may have been one of his first acting gigs was on Out of Control. Bruce Baum, who did Baby Man, a very funny man, still doing work out there, still doing stand up. Bruce was on our show. I mean, Bob Hughes had a great sense of A, comedy, and B, of talent. And so he brought in some wonderful guest stars for the show.
I told you we'd go about 20 minutes. You mind if we go about 5 more minutes, because we're kind of
I didn't realize we'd already gone that long. Yeah, but
yeah.
Let's keep going. Man, we're having fun.
Thank you. So is the cast still in touch today?
Yes. Dave and I stay in touch, and we actually there's an inside joke where his nickname is Beerhead and mine is Tater Balls, and that's actually how I have him in my speed dial on my cell phone. He's listed as Beerhead. Whenever Dave comes to Pittsburgh, or if he comes in the area to do a show, we get together. I go to the show, we go have lunch, we hang out. If he's in D.C., where my daughter lives, I'll go down and see him down there. So Dave and I stay in contact pretty regularly. Dave Stenstrom and I communicate on Facebook, and Jill Wakewood and I, who played Angela. Diz is the only one that sort of, she hasn't adapted any of the modern technologies of life, and so she doesn't have Facebook or anything like that. But when I'm in LA, I was at a book signing. There's a book out there called Slimed, the early histories of Nickelodeon, and Diz and I were at the book signings for that. And so, she hasn't changed. It was great to see her, and I think she still works at there's a newsstand.
Unfortunately, I believe not. They shut the newsstand down.
Oh,
I was disappointed because I don't get out to L.A. very often, but I always wanted to go by the newsstand and meet Diz, and unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to do it.
Well, if I find out where she is, Joe, I'll let you know, because I know she's somewhere, So, but yeah, I mean, Dave and I stay in tight contact, but the other ones, it's a little bit more infrequent. But we all, the show was really tight. When you do 26 shows with people, there tends to be a little tension. It gets a little weird. But we used to go, we went whitewater rafting together. We went out together after Friday shooting. We would all go out for beers at a place on Van Nuys Boulevard called The Barrel. I don't even know if that's still there anymore. But we would hit The Barrel because that was the closest bar to where we were shooting. And we would all just hang out together. We really just enjoyed each other's company.
Now, Dave Coulier was playing a character named Dave Coulier. And Diz was playing a character named Diz. Did you find, especially with doing a children's show, did anyone actually think Hern Burford was a real person, since all these other people were kind of playing themselves?
No, I think Hern was so over the top. At least Dave dressed like a normal person. They used to find my wardrobe in like Salvation Armies and flea markets. So everything that Hern did was kind of over the top, and so I don't think anybody ever thought that was my real character. But I don't know. Maybe there were people that did. I know there was a band, and if you Google it, it pops up. There was a band in Texas or somewhere in the South called My Dinner with Hern Burford, and I wanted to get the CD. I thought they were. I think when I reached out to them, I think they thought I was going to bust them. I didn't really care. I just wanted a copy of their music, but I never got it. And but yeah, I mean, we were definitely part of pop culture in the mid '80s up until the '90s. We were definitely out there, and so I don't know if people thought Hern Burford was who I was or wasn't, because in the credits it says Marty Schiff, Hern Burford.
One of my favorite Hern bits was the one where Dave was looking for the makeover, and you put the clothes on him that I forget what it said on the back, but you said like, "Oh, it's fantastic" or something, and he said, "Yeah, well, it's written all over it," and you said, "Well, you put it there." And he turned around and it was actually written there. And then you said, "Well, it's better than what's on mine." And you turned around and it said, "Eat at Joe's." Right, and then you looked at the camera and said, "You owe me one, Joe." I found that so funny.
That's exactly right. That was it. That was. I think the show may have been fashion. I'm not sure. And I end up in a dress and heels at the end of that show. If that was the fashion show. So, which was pretty funny.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I'll wrap it up. I just got a couple more questions. Do you have a favorite episode of all the ones you did, or a favorite skit?
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of favorite skits. I think Backyard Barbecue may have been one of my favorites, but where I made spaghetti on a grill. But I think the very we didn't know it at the time. We didn't know that it was going to be the last episode. But the very last episode is the one where Waldo is playing with the hurry-up machine, and it becomes a time machine, and we become old, and we're doing the show as old men and old women, and that was so much fun. We just had such a great time, and I watched that episode today, and it still makes me laugh. And I think back to everything we did in that show that was hilarious. And then, of course, Waldo fixes it, but he goes back too far, and we turn into babies. So the last thought is we're all babies at the end of the show. That was the most fun episode to make. We just had such a great time, and I think had we known it was the last one, it would have had a little bit more meaning to us. But we thought we were going so strong. I actually had a party at my house the night Bob Hughes had a meeting with the network. Bob was meeting at the network, and I was sure we were going to be picked up for more. I had 150 people at my house, and Bob calls me and says, "I'm not going to be coming to the party, Marty." I said, "What's up, Bob?" He said, "We didn't get picked up." And I went, "What am I going to tell all these people that are in my house?" And so I didn't know that was going to be the last episode ever of Out of Control. And so it's the one where we turn into old people, and then we go back and end up as babies by the time we do the credit roll. That was my favorite episode.
Well, last question I got for you, and I'm sure you get asked this all the time. Have you heard anything, any rumors, anything about possible DVDs?
It's funny. About 10 years ago, maybe more, Dave and I tried to buy the series from Nickelodeon, and they wouldn't sell it to us because, everything they have as far as their library is concerned has value to it. And I would hope that they would. There are masters out there of we did that show in 84 and 85. We were still working on 2-inch videotape back in those days. And so they would probably have to remaster them all and whatnot. But, I hope they do. It was it's a historic show, number one, since it was the very first show that was produced by Nickelodeon for Nickelodeon. But there's a lot of good stuff there. There's a lot of people that went on to bigger careers, Dave, of course, being the most prominent. But, we all went on I worked for another, 12 to 14 years after Out of Control. and as an actor, and then moved into producing and directing. But I would hope that they would get into making them DVDs. And I think that if your fans that are listening, let Nickelodeon know that they want to see all the episodes on DVD, and if they hear it enough, maybe they'll do it. But I wouldn't be able to tell you whether they have that planned or not.
I mentioned to you that I worked in a video store years ago, and this was back in the 90s, and we had a regular customer, who would come in all the time, and I still see the guy to this day. He's a huge horror movie fan, so but I see the guy all the time. But he had an amazing ability to do the Diz scream. And he would and he wouldn't even come in the store. He'd just walk by the store and in the doorway do the Diz scream and just keep going. I don't know how he did it. I could never reproduce that sound.
I could do it at one time. I don't think I could do it anymore. But I think parents hated us for that scream, because their children were doing it in the back seats of their cars all the time. I think that was part of the drinking game too. I think when Diz did the Diz scream, that was a trigger for a shock as well. But certainly Diz was actually, I think, the most popular character with children. The kids just absolutely loved her, and most of her fan mail was from children. Was from kids. Mine was from drunk fraternity brothers. Dave's was from everybody, and Diz was from the kids. Children just really, really loved her, and she did some funny bits on the show. Really did.
I loved all the characters, so I don't know. Maybe I was a weird kid, but I was a kid watching it, and let me see. I was. Jeez, I got to do math now. I was 7 years old. Watching that show, and maybe I was a weird kid, but Hern was always my favorite. So.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm honored, actually. I love to hear that, because that may be the most fun I ever had going to work as an actor. Was Dawn of the Dead. It was Out of Control. Dawn of the Dead was probably my second, and then Dallas, when I was on Dallas, was probably my third. But those three. Out of Control was the most fun I ever had. I used to get up and get to work. I used to get to the studio before the donuts got there. And in film and television, that's pretty early. That's really early. Because I just couldn't wait to get to work. I just had such a great time. And Out of Control, just the cast, the crew, everybody, the ducks, everybody was just really a lot of fun. I would wake up at 3 a.m. laughing, and Sherry would look at me and, what's the problem? And I would just try to explain it. What had happened on the show that day, and it didn't translate well, but man, there was just some funny things that happened.
I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you joining us.
Joe, it was my pleasure.
Do you want to tell our listeners where they can find you, social media or wherever?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. There's actually there's 2 Marty Schiffs that pop up when you put us in. Martina McBride's brother is one of them, and then me. So you'll see a banner of me in Creepshow is my Facebook page photo, and feel free to reach out, say hello.
All right, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Joe. It was a pleasure.
1, 2, 3, go! With a bourbon chillin' man, oh yeah, with a bourbon chillin' man, oh yeah, with a bourbon chillin' man, oh yeah. We like to eat, we like to pig out, we like a mustard over sauerkraut. My favorite thing is chili dogs. We get it on us and we look like dogs, oh yeah, with a bourbon chillin' man.
Keep wearing those pajamas.
With the plastic feet.
Keep wearing those pajamas.
Tell everyone you meet.
Keep wearing those pajamas.
With the back door flap.
Keep wearing those pajamas.
Don't open, it's a trap.
Oh no!
It's a trap. Some people call them bitches. Some people call them jammies. They can come embroidered with big money and no whammies. They can have 100 tiny commander adamas. But no matter how they look, just keep on wearing those pajamas.
Keep on wearing those pajamas. Keep wearing those pajamas.
And now we're having fun.
Keep wearing those pajamas.
And now the song is done.